5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman Live. Hold the microphone up and say hello to the people, Dad.
Hello. We are in Fire Central here in Los Angeles. Even not being in immediate proximity to any of the wildfires, we can still see the smoke. We can see flames. We can see particulate matter invading our air. In some ways, it's almost like being in a post-apocalyptic scenario. We're going to talk a lot more about the fires from firsthand experience, analyze the political implications. But before we get to that, I want to mention one thing about which I am in agreement. Guess with who, Sam?
Donald Trump.
And do you know what that is?
Canada.
Donald Trump is the new imperialist, right?
Right.
You know, he is, at least on paper, in theory, the greatest American imperialist since William McKinley fought the Spanish-American War. And one of his imperial aims, along with buying Greenland and retaking the Panama Canal and imposing these draconian tariffs, is, at least in wild theory, to make Canada the 51st state. I'm all for that. I'm all in, Donald Trump. And if you and I agree on something, then surely it's the right thing to do. Why do you think I'd love to see Canada as the 51st state, Sam?
Because they're a progressive country, I guess.
They're a progressive country. They're more progressive than the United States. And what it would likely mean is 2 new progressive senators, which in close elections could turn the balance of the Senate. And I think there are about 40 million people in Canada, which would mean dozens of new members of the U.S. House of Representatives. And most of them would likely be liberal Democrats, more than enough to turn control of the House to the Democrats. So get in touch with me, President-elect Trump, and I will do everything in my power to advance your goal of making Canada the 51st state.
I think that was a weird opening, especially after the whole fire stuff. But hey.
I know. I wanted to do something a little bit out of character.
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about the fires.
Well, obviously, let's start just saying that we are live from Los Angeles, but we are safe. We have not received an evacuation notice, although today Los Angeles County accidentally sent an evacuation warning, not a mandate, but a warning to the entire county by accident. So that was a little bit of a big oopsie, to say the least. It's been a pretty bad time out here. There are people without power. The air quality is really bad. Obviously, there are people who have lost their homes, lost their lives. It's a pretty terrible situation. Yeah,
the devastation has been enormous. It could well approach $100 billion of damage, but that's not the worst of it, of course. At least 5 deaths, and likely many more as they continue to sift through the rubble.
300,000, I think,
evacuees. Yes.
People have been ordered or warned to evacuate.
Over 300,000, exactly. Many thousands of homes and structures destroyed.
Yeah.
An uncounted number of persons injured. God knows what's going to happen to the ability of the good people of Los Angeles ever to get fire insurance or any other kind of insurance. It's going to cost as much as the cost of your home, the way things are going here now. Iconic landmarks have been destroyed, historic schools and museums. The Will Rogers Park, the Will Rogers House are absolutely devastated. They are in rubble. And, you know, for anyone with any kind of respiratory issue, there's really no good place to be in the Los Angeles area, because even if you're not near a fire, the smoke, the particulates are going to affect you. Now,
Yeah, the air quality where we are right now.
What is it right now? And we're not proximate to a fire.
No. The air quality where we are right now is 159, which is considered unhealthy.
Yeah.
If you look at the air quality map, most of Los Angeles is in the red, and then the two pockets of the worst fires, which is in Palisades and the Pasadena area, are like dark red purple, which is like, you can't even be there, basically. There are basically, four main fires. There's one in the Palisades. There's one in the Pasadena area. There was one last night in the Hollywood Hills in Runyon Canyon, and there's a new one now.
Not far from Hollywood itself, right?
There was a moment there that it looked sketchy, that it looked like it was coming down the mountain straight for Hollywood, which was a scary time. And there's one out near Calabasas, which is a new fire in the last few hours. It seems like every day now there's a new fire out here, and
right.
I don't know when the end is in sight. That's the other big
Nobody knows where the end is in sight, because the conditions of drought and heat and the Santa Ana winds, those high winds, are completely conducive to starting and spreading fires. And very small sparks can set off a fire almost anywhere, particularly as we learned in the foothills out in the mountains, right, Sam?
Yeah, the issue... I actually wrote this down because, although some of this stuff is obvious, I think it's important to talk about. These are just the facts of the case. There are a few big issues that made these fires so bad. One is water. LA has no water, especially no fresh water, and there's been lack of rain, which I'll talk about. So sometimes the firefighters literally run out of water. They have to bring tanks of water into LA to try to fight the fires. The other second big issue is the wind. So the Santa Ana winds the last few days have been insane.
In the mountains, they've hit 100 miles an hour.
Right. I think they're the worst winds this decade since 2011 or around that time.
Since 2011.
They were so bad earlier in the week when the Palisades and the Pasadena fire broke out that they couldn't fly aircraft, and they use aircraft a lot to fight the fires through dropping fire retardant and water. And the first few days, they couldn't even get aircraft up in the air because the winds were so powerful.
Right.
The other issue is the winds blow these embers, these particulates up to 2 miles. And if these embers land on a house, it can catch the whole house on fire just from one ember. The third big issue is rain. So it basically hasn't rained here
forever, a whole year, right?
A year. I think I just saw that this winter, which is supposed to be the rainy season in LA, the rainy season in LA is supposed to start at the end of December, I believe, and last until April-ish. So since the beginning of the rainy season, this is the lowest amount of rain Los Angeles has gotten since 1964.
I think it was 0.02 right?
inches of rain since the rainy season started, which is nothing, right?
Yeah.
So there's no rain. Everything is so dry. So essentially, anything that this fire hits, any embers that this hits, instantly burns up. The last thing that people need to understand is the humidity. So the humidity numbers the last few days have been super low. There's no moisture in the air, again, making everything catch fire much quickly. So all these climate-related things. And the reason why the Santa Ana winds are so bad right now, Santa Ana winds get stronger when pressure and hot air flow through the desert and into the Los Angeles area. So it's been so hot this summer, so hot this winter in the desert that the Santa Ana winds have been faster than they have in 9, 10,
15 years. Yeah, I didn't know you were such a climate scientist, Sam.
I wanted to be
very impressive.
Prepared for today's show.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I want to give an enormous shout out to the first responders, to those folks who are flying those very dangerous planes and helicopters over the fire area with limited visibility, dangerous breathing conditions. My heart goes out to the firefighters on foot, hundreds upon hundreds of them, who are risking their lives going in proximity to the fires, again, spraying water and fire retardants. We cannot thank enough to these brave men and women. Without them, God knows, LA overall may have burned, right, Sam?
Yeah, maybe. And the weird thing is, too, is the previous 2 years, the rainy season has been really wet in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Last year, I was here for the rainy season, and I think it rained. I mean, they were talking about torrential downpours last year, and then basically since then, it hasn't really rain. I mean, it's like spit and spattered. If you're closer to the ocean, you might get some more moisture in the air, more rain, but there's a massive drought. And it's so weird that the weather fluctuates like this. It fluctuates from one year of
That's what climate change does.
Torrential downpour to the next year of extreme drought.
People have to understand climate change produces extreme weather conditions of all kinds. And I'm not a scientist, but I was a science major in college. Oh, how about that? I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express, but I know something.
That's a bad joke.
Yeah, I know.
You like that joke?
No, not really. Had to read scientific papers, and there's pretty much a consensus that climate change did create the ideal conditions, sadly, for the beginning and spreading of these fires. And this, sadly, is not an isolated incident. You know, you got to understand it in the context of the devastation that climate change in many different ways has wrought all over our country. Climate change is no longer a theoretical scientific model, although we still certainly have that, and that's very important. But it's here. It's real. And it's destroying people's lives. It's the wildfires in California and elsewhere. It's the extreme drought in places like Arizona, the extreme heat. It's the tornadoes that have ripped across much of our Midwest and border state areas. It's the extreme storms that have devastated our southern, eastern states. Miami is sinking. Miami is sinking from climate change. Miami floods even when there isn't rain. Our coastal areas are in grave jeopardy from climate change. And I cannot understand why this is not the burning issue. It's a bad metaphor there.
Bad metaphor.
But maybe a good one. I don't know, depending on your taste. Because if you don't solve climate change, none of the rest is going to matter, because it's going to be a fight for mere survival on this planet. As you know, we're getting a tiny taste of that now in Los Angeles. And of course, any tragedy like this is a test of our leadership. And our greatest leaders have risen to the occasion and used tragedies to put forth their empathy, their compassion, to bring us together as those who can understand the humanity that is threatened and the need to pull together to deal with these kinds of tragedies. And we've seen that on both sides of the aisle. We saw that with Ronald Reagan after the Challenger tragedy. We saw that with Bill Clinton after the Oklahoma City bombing. And we have a similar challenge here. And prophetically, this challenge is coming precisely at the time when whose life are we celebrating, Sam?
President Carter, Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter. You know, we hear a lot of talk about evangelical Christianity. Jimmy Carter lived it. He was our most devout president. He's taught Sunday school for his entire life. And the values that he shared with his students are the values he lived by. He believed that as a political leader, you had to be a moral example, and no one lived a more moral life than Jimmy Carter. He also emphasized, both as president, which was a mixed bag, and as our greatest ex-president, the value of human rights and compassion and concern for others. And so, you know, at the time when we're celebrating the life of Jimmy Carter, this poses a particular challenge to our political leadership, particularly to our new leader, President-elect Donald Trump, who also has said, in my second term, I am going to bring us all together. I am going to unite us to such a degree that you won't even have to bother voting in the next election. You can interpret that in different ways, but that's what he said. He also issued lots of effusive praise of Jimmy Carter. And yet, in his first test of national tragedy and the legacy of Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump reverted back to his worst impulses. Instead of pulling us together, instead of showing compassion for the people of Los Angeles County, instead of offering to help in any way he can, he sought to exploit this human environmental tragedy for political purposes. Even though we know, and Donald Trump would never admit this because you can't succeed in Republican politics by admitting anything about climate change, even though we know climate change set all the conditions for this tragedy, Trump blamed who, Sam? Who did he put the blame on?
I believe Newsom. Right?
Governor Newsom. We'll figure out, whether or not, various political leaders had some responsibility for this, which is...
Right, but there may be blame on Newsom. There may be
so.
Blame on Bass. We don't know.
Mayor Bass, who knows? Presidential administrations, maybe the administration of Donald Trump himself for worsening climate change. But that's down the road. We don't know. And yet Donald Trump jumps on this, tries to exploit it politically, and lies about it. He accuses Governor Newsom of creating the fires by failing to sign something, water conservation declaration, which would have brought all kinds of water to Los Angeles County to avoid maybe or combat this tragedy. No such declaration exists. There was no refusal of Governor Newsom to sign some kind of declaration that could have prevented this tragedy or mitigated this tragedy. He also claimed that California didn't have aircraft to spray water and retardants on the fire, when in fact they have one of the most extensive aircraft forces in the country to do this very thing. And they weren't flying not because they didn't have the aircraft. Why weren't they flying on that first day, Sam? Pretty obvious why.
They weren't allowed because the winds were too high.
Yeah, it was much too dangerous. And again, Trump exploits this with falsehoods to try to pin blame on his Democratic opponents.
It's really disgusting.
It's disgusting.
It's really gross.
And what did he call Governor Newsom?
New scum.
New scum. Not only does he pile falsehoods, not only does he try to exploit a human tragedy for political ends, but he reverts to middle school insults. I'm very familiar with those because I get them all the time. But you wouldn't expect it from the leader of the free world at the time when we're celebrating the legacy of the most moral president, maybe not the most successful one, but the most moral president we've ever had, Jimmy Carter. Can you imagine Jimmy Carter doing what Donald Trump did in the face of this tragedy?
I was not alive for his presidency, so I can't really say. I don't know much about him. But
I know a lot about him.
Yeah, you answer that.
I know him personally. I've followed his unimaginable for any president other than Donald Trump. Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Dwight Eisenhower. None of these presidents would have acted in the way that Donald Trump has. And none of these presidents would be resorting to contemptible middle school insults against your political opponents. You wouldn't expect that in a candidate for, local coroner or dog catcher, much less the president-elect.
It's not just Trump, and I know you like to focus on Trump a lot, but it's not just Trump.
I agree.
I've seen a lot of people on the right making statements about this fire, and it's like the word climate change is like Voldemort, like saying Voldemort.
You can't say it.
They just won't say it. They'll blame the fire on everything around the sun except for the sun itself.
Yes.
And as I went through the facts of the case, it is very clear that this is very much caused by climate-related issues that are out of the norm.
Correct.
Which I think I made very clear.
And you have to put it in context. This is not an isolated climate change episode. It is put in context of all of these other climate change catastrophic episodes, the droughts, the tornadoes, the storms, the heat, the flooding. It's all part of the same context.
And these are the biggest and most devastating fires in LA County history. There's never been recorded damage or breadth of fires worse than these last few days.
And we've had, in recent years as well, historic fires.
Right. In Malibu, there was a historic fire.
It's happening all over. And, not only, I completely agree with you. It's not just Donald Trump. In fact, although, I comment a lot about Trump because he is the leader of the movement, I've said many times, and please consult shortly my forthcoming book, Conservative to the Core, A New History of American Conservatism. It's coming out in the next few months, Notre Dame University Press, and I make the point that the old so-called mainstream Republicans are gone. The conservative movement, the Republican movement, is now nearly 100% MAGA. That's why, as you point out, all these other figures are doing the same thing Donald Trump is doing. If Donald Trump, let me finish, blipped out tomorrow, yes, his personality is, unique and kind of dominates things, but the core of the movement would not change one whit.
Yeah, but if we're talking about the right wing in America and their delusion over climate change, it started way before Donald Trump. And
absolutely.
And if he was president or not, they would still be doing the same things that they're doing.
That's my point. If Donald Trump blipped out tomorrow, while his personality, was significant, but the approach, the policies, the rhetoric wouldn't change at all. Because the conservative movement and the Republican Party is thoroughly MAGA. The so-called old mainstream Republicans are pretty much gone. The Adam Kinzingers, the Mitt Romneys, the Liz Cheneys. They're either already gone or going to be gone very, very soon.
Mitt Romney is not some sort of climate hero. I mean, let's not.
No, but he's a little better.
Maybe
it's what you got to reach to.
Yeah, I guess.
That's how unfortunate it really is. But and not only is the incoming administration not going to admit the challenges of climate change, they're going to make it much, much worse. I understand it's a worldwide problem. It's not the United States, but the United States is the world leader. And what has Trump promised to do on day one after he's inaugurated?
Drill, drill, drill.
Drill, drill, drill. Just make things even worse. Not so much for old, broken down people like me, but for young people like you and even younger. This is nothing short of one of the greatest tragedies in human history. You may think I'm exaggerating, I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not.
Yeah, and let's also just call a spade a spade. Republicans have been in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry for decades. And the fossil fuel industry, as we know from science, has been probably the leading contributor to the climate crisis on planet Earth. So
100%.
Let's not forget all that.
Plus, they knew about climate change decades ago, just as the tobacco companies knew about the dangers of cigarette smoking. And they suppressed it. They concealed it. They kept it from the American people because what is it that motivates the very rich above all else, Sam?
Dinero, baby.
Getting richer. No matter how rich you are, somehow you just want to get richer. And we've also seen that, with all of these billionaires, genuflecting to Trump. And what's much worse is to fight climate change, you got to tell the truth about it, right? You can't be telling lies. And we are abandoning truth-telling. What did Mark Zuckerberg of Meta just do? Do you know?
Didn't he end the fact-checking?
And the fact-checking and hired, some new right-wingers who are committed to these mythological views of our history and our country. In state after state, Republican governments are cracking down on what teachers like me can teach, virtually forcing us contrary to the overwhelming thrust of modern scholarship to teach Republican orthodoxy on American history and contemporary American society. So, to combat climate change and really deal with any other fundamental human problem, it starts with telling the truth, and truth is under enormous assault right now.
There's this weird trend recently where the idea of truth is said to be somewhere between the left and the right, which is not true. And the truth is the truth, whether it's left, whether it's right, whether it's neither. And it feels like these moves from people like Zuckerberg are just trying to be like, we are taking the voices of the right and making them as equal as the voices of the left. And that's not how you find the truth.
Exactly. That has nothing to do with the truth.
Nothing to do with the truth.
In fact, one phrase I would eliminate from the English language is both sides. There isn't both sides when it comes to the truth. There is one basic scientific truth about climate change. It's not a Republican truth. It's not a Democratic truth. It is a scientific truth.
Right. Yeah, it's concerning. And, as Trump rises to power, it feels like we have no control over the truth anymore. And it seems like nobody cares about the truth anymore. And Trump can go on TV and say whatever he wants about the wildfires and whatever he wants about climate change
or anything else. About Roe versus Wade, about the 2020 election.
And it seems like the media is not going to hold his feet to the fire anymore about this kind of stuff. Because, again, they're so worried about both sides and meeting in the middle. It's like the truth isn't in the middle. The truth is the truth. It doesn't matter which side it's on, if it's in the middle, if it's up or it's down. You have to call people out on the facts of the matter.
And the media is totally intimidated by Trump and is increasingly controlled by billionaires and corporations. Look what's happened with the Washington Post and the LA Times, controlled by billionaires. They're stepping in on behalf of Trump, no question, and putting their thumb on the editorial policies of those newspapers. They're contributing. They're bribing Trump, contributing to his inauguration. That's the way you pump money to Trump. You can't directly bribe him, but under the law, by contributing to his inauguration, you can indirectly bribe him. And increasingly, we're seeing media controlled by big corporations that also are kowtowing to Trump. We saw that with ABC, controlled by Disney, caving into Trump and paying him $15 million on a very dubious libel suit.
Yeah, and, we see things like on CNN. It seems that they see the truth or balanced journalism as having someone on the left on a panel and someone having on the right on the panel, and they just fight for 20 minutes, and that's their idea of journalism. I mean, it's a total farce of the truth. It makes no sense of the truth. It's just frustrating. And I think I'm especially frustrated because, I'm living in Los Angeles. We're seeing the effects of climate change with our own eyes. We can read the statistics and the facts about the weather changes, and still we're in this post-truth world where nobody seems to believe it. Nobody seems to care. Our president certainly doesn't care. And it's really demoralizing.
It's opposite of the president not caring. The president believes it is in his political interest and in the interests of his rich buddies and donors to deny climate change, regardless of its effect on his constituents in the country.
That's why I just don't understand how the American people were like, yeah, that guy. That's the guy we want.
It beats me, as you know. Pictures went viral of me doing like this on election night.
I guess this is reinforcing that thought of like, how did we choose Trump? We're in the midst of this disaster, and who do we look to? Donald Trump. That's who the American people wanted to lead us through stuff like this. I just can't wrap my mind around that.
It's very difficult indeed. All right, I think we're ready for some questions.
Okay.
How many viewers do we have?
Let's see how many viewers we have. 1,300 viewers.
Nice.
Let's do some housekeeping. We only have 431 likes, so if you're tuned in, please like the channel. That'll be great. Become a member. Members get priority in questions. Also, donations get priority in questions. You can't answer every question, but if you're a member and you donate, there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance.
There's a chance, and as you know, even though I'm old and tired, I often go beyond the hour
Wow.
to get in as many questions as we can. And as you know, I don't dodge them. And I try to stick as best as I can to the truth. Doesn't mean I can't make mistakes or be in error, but that's different. Making a mistake or being in error is human. That is fundamentally different than disregarding the truth and just putting out whatever falsification serves your interest.
There you go. All right. You ready to get to questions?
I'm always ready.
Our first question is from Vincent Thomas. They say, Professor, do you think Republicans will ever take climate change seriously? And do you think Biden can do anything?
Well, what does Biden have? Another week? I don't think there's very much he can do to deal with climate change. And unfortunately, once Republicans, if they ever do, start to take climate change seriously, it may be too late. I'm not a scientist, but I've read a lot of reports saying we're getting very close to what they call the tipping point, the point at which catastrophic climate change may not be reversible, and we're in not the stage of rescuing us from climate change, but in the stage of trying to recover as best we can, going from rescue to recovery, just like any other tragedy.
A question from our moderator, Jeff Crusan. He says, what are your thoughts on this? Instead of making Canada number 51, we make each of the Canadian provinces their own new states so that we can get a whole bunch of new progressive senators instead of just 2. That's a better idea.
It's a much better idea. I'm always open to better ideas, and that's an excellent one. I have to tell you, don't hold your breath.
Sometimes you stop so abruptly. Sometimes.
Well, I figure I've already said what I have to say.
I don't disagree with it.
There's no reason to.
It's just hard for me to deal with. Sometimes you just seems like you're about to continue your sentence and you just stop.
Hey, I'm old. You got to give me a break.
Okay, you get a break for that. Next question is from member Pro Viewer. They say, has America ever waged a 4-front war? In this case, Canada, Mexico, Greenland, and Panama.
Boy, that's a good question.
Well, these aren't wars that they're waging.
Yeah, not yet.
Well,
we've certainly waged a lot of 2-front wars, including, of course, World War II. I'd never want to state a negative. Very hard to prove a negative. We've had hundreds of wars. So at the moment, a 4-front war does not come to mind. That does not mean there never has been one. I'll think about it some more and give you a better answer when we come on again next Tuesday. But it doesn't immediately come to mind.
Member Chris Wall said, I recently read Nightmare in Red, the McCarthy Era in Perspective by Richard M. Fried, and Voices of Protest, Huey Long, Father Coughlin, and the Great Depression by Alan Brinkley.
Brinkley. That's not Douglas Brinkley.
Oh, that's not Douglas Brinkley. Okay.
That's a different Brinkley.
The historical figures and movements covered in the book had many differences, but a common theme is that demagogues will eventually have a fall from grace. I don't think many of us thought Trump would have made it this far, but do you think he will also have an eventual fall from grace?
I've been thinking that for years.
You've been predicting his fall for grace for a long time.
Yes, for years. I've been thinking, how could, this guy continue to go on? But Trump really is unique in American history. Maybe even, I'm not an expert in world history, but I know something about it, maybe even in world history. I can't think, certainly in American history, of another figure who has been so unaccountable for everything that he has done, not just recently, but throughout his career, going all the way back to when the United States Department of Justice found and firmly believed that he was violating the Fair Housing Act by discriminating against minorities in his real estate company. Who did he hire to defend him? Speaking of Joseph McCarthy.
I don't know.
McCarthy's lawyer, Roy Cohen, his belligerent, feisty, take-no-prisoners lawyer, and by obstructing, by attacking, they basically, as they did here, delayed the case for so long that it just faded away. And, we don't need to go through all his bankruptcies his indictments, his convictions, none of it has held him accountable in any significant way. Even these big fines that he got in civil cases are not going to make much of a dent in his fortune, and if anything, seem to have helped, not hurt his political career. So I've never seen anyone get away with as much as Donald Trump did, even trying to overturn our democracy, undermining our national security by stealing critical national security documents and, storing them in totally unsecured conditions. We've never seen anything remotely like this in the history of the United States, and I can't think of another political figure anywhere in modern history.
What are your thoughts on Milton Friedman, and why do you think his work isn't emphasized as much in college-level courses? It seems to me that, what's this word? Keynesian economics tends to be given greater focus.
That's certainly true. Milton Friedman was the greatest exponent of laissez-faire, hands-off economics. Just let the market work its magic and keep the government out of it entirely. Keynesian economics is much more interventionist in terms of positive government policies designed to promote a growing, prosperous, job-creating economy. And over time, our leaders and our intellectuals have come to embrace much more of the Keynesian approach to economics rather than the total hands-off approach that Milton Friedman has advocated. We kind of had that, before the New Deal to a great extent, and we had a depression or a very deep recession about every decade. The Great Depression of the 1890s was almost as bad as the Great Depression of the 1930s, but most economists and analysts would agree that the reforms of the New Deal were critical in protecting us from future depressions. So, most analysts don't want to go back to the pre-New Deal political economy.
Comic Fan says, do you predict Elon and Trump's relationship won't last? Because according to the Washington Post, Trump and Elon had an argument about tariffs.
I don't think any room is big enough for those two egos, to tell you the truth. So one would argue they're likely headed towards an explosion. On the other hand, maybe not, because Musk holds tremendous power because of his enormous wealth and his willingness to deploy that wealth, tremendous power over Trump and the Republican Party. And that could well keep the relationship going for a very long time. We saw how he was instrumental in torpedoing the first bipartisan deal on the debt ceiling, in part by threatening to use his financial power to defeat Republicans who joined with Democrats to forge that compromise.
Still Alive says, the thing that's giving me hope is I hear there's been a plan in place in federal courts to stop much of what Trump wants to do by, quote, flooding the zone with lawsuits. The ACLU is particularly ready. What do you think?
Yes, I've talked about that. People have asked me what they can do, and I've said, get involved politically, organize, and of course, help get out the vote yourself, and if you're a lawyer, join in the legal efforts to thwart illegal and unconstitutional things that Trump may or may not be doing. I think that's a very wise strategy. And even if the Supreme Court, as we've seen so many times, bails out Donald Trump, at the very least, this kind of legal strategy will long delay the implementation of the policies that are being challenged.
Member Paul Hellman says, why doesn't our Attorney General release the January 6th report immediately? His prior delays have proven nearly disastrous.
Couldn't agree more. I've known Merrick Garland since the 1960s, for 60 years, since we were both teenagers. We were both involved in the Boston area debate programs. I thought he was a great judge, maybe the best judge in America, and maybe the worst attorney general we ever had. Not because he's corrupt or malevolent, but because he was so afraid of what Republicans might criticize him for that he didn't take the necessary actions that any attorney general should have taken. He delayed almost 2 years until after someone else had acted, the Congressional January 6th Committee, before appointing a special prosecutor to investigate Donald Trump. We knew right away, we knew on January 7th, that there were things that had to be investigated about what Donald Trump did. And it is unconscionable that Merrick Garland should have delayed so long. Did he learn nothing from his own experience when Republicans wouldn't even give him a hearing 9 months or 8 months before the election? Didn't he learn it doesn't matter what you do? The Republicans are going to blast you and criticize you anyway. So you can't operate in fear. And you've got to do the right thing no matter what and not worry about how the opposition may react. His non-action will go down in U.S. history, I think, in infamy. Sadly, even though he is a very, very good moral individual. You've heard me say many times, it's not just the evil people who wreak havoc on this earth. It's the very good people who don't do enough to stop them. And we were again seeing, Merrick Garland afraid to act boldly. He should have released that report already. What's to stop him?
Me.
You. And he better not delay until after Trump takes over.
Remember Michael U, I think, or Michael U.Y. says, any thoughts on how democracies all over the world are backsliding?
Yes. You've heard me say this if you've tuned in before. Democracy is precious. And like all precious things, it can be destroyed. We tend to take democracy for granted, and that's a huge mistake. Throughout the great swath of human history, democracy has been a tiny drop in the ocean of humanity. The vast number of rulerships have been either by heredity, divine right, or by conquest, not by the sovereignty of the people or democratic voting. The first golden age of democracy was right after World War I, 20th century, when you had about 24 democracies. By the 1940s, that was cut more than in half. You had the second golden age of democracy in the late 20th century, and there has been nothing but backsliding in the 21st century, not just in the United States, but all over the world. The Economist that tracks these things has now reported that fewer than 10% of the world's people live in fully functioning democracies, including the United States, which it ranks as a flawed, not fully functioning democracy. So we are actually seeing a reversion to historical patterns where people are looking to authoritarians like Donald Trump or Viktor Orban in Hungary or Modi in India or Putin in Russia or Xi in China, looking for authoritarian rulers to solve their problems. As Trump has said, only I can solve it. Nobody else. I'm the indispensable person, and that is the royal road to authoritarianism.
Why and how does Fox News and right-wing media get away with false information? Isn't there a regulation or laws to handle these matters?
There aren't real strong laws or regulation. The media has...
There used to be, but they overturned
used to be the fairness doctrine, which required a balanced opinions. But that was overturned long ago under Ronald Reagan. But there's no law which says you can't put out falsehoods as part of your coverage, particularly when you label it as opinion.
Right.
What there is the check is private lawsuits, as we saw, Dominion collecting nearly $1 billion from Fox News for putting out false information about their voting machines, claiming, they had flipped them from Trump to Biden. But those lawsuits are very difficult. It requires deep pockets. They're uncertain. They take a long time. And the truth is, even, $800 million doesn't deter Fox News because their profits are so much greater than that. And they get their profits by appealing to a very particular audience. So it hasn't deterred them at all. And it's gotten worse because of the billionaires and the corporate interests who are taking over the media. The classic statement of the function of the media is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And instead, we're seeing the media joining and appeasing and supporting the comfortable.
Limited Light says, as Marie Nichols asked, how will Merchan and sentencing impact Donna? I guess Donald. I guess they're trying to ask.
Not at all.
Who's Donna?
I assume they mean Donald.
They wrote Donna. Somebody wrote Donna.
Yeah, I can think of the song about Donna, but
okay,
other
sing
than
it.
that, no,
come on, sing it.
I'm not singing. At any rate, not at all. Apparently he's meting out no punishment. So you know how Trump's going to spin that. It's proof I did nothing wrong. This was a political witch hunt. The judge has proven it.
Same old shit, just a different day.
Exactly. So, it's not going to hurt him at all. I mean, can you imagine a political figure just a few years ago being convicted of 34 felonies? I don't care what they were, by a jury of their peers, and being civilly found to have sexually assaulted a woman and to have been civilly found to have committed massive financial fraud. Could you imagine just a few years ago any political leader surviving any one of those things? Remember Herman Cain, a leading light for the Republican presidential nomination. 3 women accused him, no proof, no trial, of sexual harassment. He was gone almost overnight. 20 some odd women have accused Trump, much less being civilly found to have sexually assaulted a woman, and it hasn't seemed to dent him at all. You don't remember this, but you know about President Bill Clinton's affair with a White House intern.
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yes.
Who was most loudly saying...
The right wing.
Yes, this morally disqualifies Clinton from being president. We don't care what his policies are.
All politicians talk about both sides.
You have to be a moral exemplar. Things have now turned 180 degrees, of course.
Of course. Diane Phillips says, hello. I've been wondering what happened to the retired judge that was overseeing Trump's financials. Is she still going to be doing that after he's inaugurated? Just curious if she's released a report or will. Thanks, and I appreciate all the hard work you do. D/TN.
That's a great question. I've not seen any report, and I very much doubt if anything's going to come out while Donald Trump is president. I'm sure that if there is an ongoing investigation, and I don't know whether there is or not, likely it would be suspended.
Does Cannon have jurisdiction over Jack Smith and the DOJ? Can she really block the release of the report, and what needs to happen to stop her?
Just release the report. What is she going to do? Nothing.
I don't know.
She can hold Merrick Garland in contempt, I suppose, but that would be a great stretch. Release it. There's nothing anyone can do to you. You're leaving your office in a week. You're going to be a private citizen. Just release the darn report. And don't worry about Eileen Cannon or anyone else.
Who would you worry about?
I don't worry about anyone except your mom.
Right. Dudley Murdoch says, will there be an H5N1 pandemic, or is that highly unlikely? You're a doctor now. You're a public health expert.
Yeah, I'm the wrong kind of doctor, so I'm going to have to pass on that, except to say it's certainly possible from what I've read. But, I have no particular expertise in epidemiology. I can't even pronounce it, much less, analyze it.
George Miller, USA says, what can be done about the homelessness crisis, the drug crisis, and the expensive cost of living? Solve all the problems.
So you want me to solve all the problems of the world?
No, just of America.
Just in America.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to pass on that one for now. And, maybe we'll have a show dealing with it, but I can't answer that in a minute or two. It wouldn't be fair.
Toyota Corolla says, excuse me, here up in Northern California, we've had a bomb cyclone and flooding rain for the last few months. The climate crisis is here, and I don't think we're ready.
We're not even close.
No, we're not even.
And the incoming administration is committed to making it worse.
Right.
Not mitigating it. And as I said, it's a worldwide crisis. And if the United States doesn't lead, then the worldwide effort is going to falter.
The Lab Lover says, will our democracy survive 4 years of Donald Trump?
Yes, I believe it will, but only if those of us who believe in democracy put up as stout a resistance as possible. And earlier in the show, I laid out some of the kinds of things we can do.
Member Tarrant says, do you have to tweak the keys by finding a new pattern going back many elections to determine winners and losers like you did in 81 to develop the original keys?
I might have to. Look, I've taken a lot of heat for being wrong, even though I've had a 42-year record of not being wrong before that. But I'll take the heat. And I was very candid in saying I've got to reevaluate the system. No system lasts forever. What have I said that I'm not, Sam?
Gene Dixon with the crystal ball, Mike Johnson who speaks to the Almighty.
Right. I'm only basing my system on history, and history can change. A 42-year run is a pretty good run. So I've got to evaluate whether history has so changed that maybe I need to develop a new kind of system, or perhaps just tweak the keys. And of course, one thing I've talked about that's changed a lot is the enormous influence of disinformation coming from the billionaires and the corporations who have so much control over the new means of communication today.
Member PV Kip 999 says, is Trump actually going to take Greenland using economic and military force? That seems improbable.
It's certainly improbable, but Trump has done improbable things before. I think it's a remote possibility, but I never dismiss out of hand any kind of crazy things that Trump might do. Remember, he tried to ban Muslims from coming into the United States in direct contradiction to the Constitution. You can't single out a religious group like that. He claimed, to build a wall with Mexico, paying for it. So who knows, what Trump may try to do. Is he becoming the new imperialist, the new William McKinley, which seems totally in contradiction to his belief in America first, limited government, fiscal constraint. This would blow up all of that.
Here's sort of a combined question from Garo Mario and George Miller, USA. We've joked about Trump making Canada the first state. Do you think he's actually serious about it? I mean, that wouldn't even be possible unless you're taxed.
I think he's just tweaking the Canadians. I don't think he's really serious about making Canada the 51st state. I don't think Canada would agree to it.
Right.
I don't think you'd get a constitutional amendment for it, even in the United States. But I'm all for it. Go for it.
Right. Apparently, even conservative party leaders like Doug Ford have renounced Trump's talking about that.
Of course. They understand what it is, how silly it is. It's just trolling.
It's just trolling. Look, Trump likes to troll. Trump likes to troll around.
Exactly.
He likes to be a troll. This is just more of him trolling.
Yes. I think he's more serious about Greenland, though.
Yes, I agree with that.
That, he could try there.
Professor, with all grim outlooks, we have now We have now with wars. Okay, Professor, with all the grim outlooks we now have with wars, cold wars, invasions, climate ignorance, where do we find the spark and the hope of positivity in the world?
Oh, there's a lot of positivity in the world. You know, one of the most positive things, of course, is scientific advances. You know, the kind of thing that RFK Jr. fights against, you know, vaccines, gene therapy, new ways of understanding nutrition and exercise that have greatly expanded our lifespans and the quality of our lives. And we still have our democratic institutions. We still have the sovereignty of the people. You know, it may be precarious and we have to fight for it, but it's certainly not lost yet. Let's not forget, we have overcome horrible crises before. We overcame the crisis of slavery and the Civil War, which wrought devastation to the South and resulted in deaths that, based on today's population, would be many, many millions of Americans. We got through the horrors of Jim Crow. We got through the depredations of the Great Depression, the worst war in history, World War II. So certainly we have the resiliency and the capacity to get through this crisis, but only if we don't just put our heads in the sand and work to preserve our institutions and our democracy.
Do you realize we're both wearing orange? I just realized that.
Oh, wow. I'm sure that's very symbolic, like William of Orange.
Oh. It's also a fire episode, and fire's orange.
Yes.
So. Be Like Water says, does Trump have any guardrails to prevent him from attacking allies, or is this just bluster to look tough for Putin?
Oh, I think it's just bluster. I don't think Trump is going to attack Germany or France or Canada. As Sam says, he loves to troll. He loves to throw things out. And I can't imagine that he would do it, or if he even proposed that it would have the support of the American people. Remember, our misaligned adventures in Vietnam cost the Democrats the presidency. Our misaligned invasion of Iraq cost Republicans the presidency. If you go to war, you know, without the support of the American people, or in a way that is ultimately going to contradict the support of the American people, you're going to pay a big price for it.
Professor, do you think that these fires are preventable?
Oh, again, I'm not a fire marshal or an environmental expert. If we do something serious about climate change very quickly, yes, but I don't see that in the horizon. I see it getting worse. How are we doing on time?
We're almost out. How many more questions do you want? We are at 50, almost 58 minutes.
4 more questions.
Wow, 4 more?
4 more questions.
Wow.
We're dealing with some really serious stuff here.
Wow.
I always like to, stretch it out for our incredibly brilliant audience. And I learn a lot from these questions.
Yes.
And comments. And I don't always have the answer, like the Forefront War.
Right.
Do we have 4 more non-repetitive questions?
I'm trying to see. James LaGruda just says, no questions from me tonight. Thoughts and prayers to both of you from back east. Please stay safe. Yes.
Thank you. We're trying.
He was just coming out here to visit. And
I know, just to see Sam. And
right.
Boom, I'm right in the middle of the apocalypse.
Yeah, it was, about the worst timing you could possibly have. You came, what, the day before the fire started?
Before. I came Monday.
Yeah, and you were originally going to come for the holidays, but then everything was too expensive and too crowded, so you're like, let's just push it back a few days.
Nice, safe, easy time to come to
no
Los
issues.
Angeles, no problems.
Right. So you were just coming to have a good time, and unfortunately, it's been. We still had a good time, right?
We still had a good time. You got to persevere. You can't let what's going on around you destroy your personal goals, your personal happiness, your personal integrity. You got to keep all of that intact.
That's a good point, Dad. What do you think about the idea of having a peer group of historians to use your 13 keys before making your prediction next presidential election?
That's been suggested to me many times, and it's certainly something I'm thinking about, particularly since I'll be, how old the next election? Pretty old.
Like 150?
150, yeah. Something like that, yeah. And Sam refuses to become the next guru of the keys, so I'm considering all options. As I've said many times, I've got almost 4 years to reconsider this.
Do you know who Robert Caro is?
Oh, sure. He is the great chronicler of Lyndon Johnson's role in the United States Senate. His great book, Master of the Senate, is a classic. He also wrote about politics in New York City and the state of New York in brilliant ways. He is one of the great narrative historians.
Well, this person wants us to bring them on as a guest.
What's that?
This person, Kathy Crandall, wants us to bring him on as a guest, Robert Caro.
He's pretty old.
What, you don't like old people?
I love old people. I think he's even older than me, and that's hard to believe.
Okay.
I'd love to have him as a guest, though, of course.
This will be the final question of the night.
Okay. Better be a biggie.
Oh, it's a biggie.
It's a biggie.
Oh, it's a biggie.
All right.
Would you rather smell Trump for a day or get COVID?
COVID.
Really?
Not even close.
No, come on.
You know.
I would rather smell COVID you'll have for like a week.
I've already had COVID, and it was pretty devastating, and I'm older now. Yeah, you know.
What does that mean? Like, you just have to hold a bottle with his scent in it?
Please. You're making me sick, you know.
All right, I'm making him sick. That's the last question of the night.
That's the last question of the night. And, you know, what is it? The frying pan or the fire? And I choose neither.
Okay. You know, obviously, we're in L.A. We've been focused a lot on the wildfires. But today was also the National Day of Mourning for Jimmy Carter, who obviously passed away. My mom's laughing. I guess there's a little bit delay in the stream.
I want to say something about Jimmy Carter.
That's what I was going to say. Do you want to say something
yes.
On this National Day of Mourning about Jimmy Carter?
I've already talked about Jimmy Carter.
Right, you've already talked about it.
But I want to tell you a personal story that says everything about the kind of moral individual that Jimmy Carter was. You know, I'm not dealing with policy and programs. I'm dealing with the human side of Jimmy Carter. In 1979, I was a serious runner, and I was competing in the Catoctin Mountains 10-kilometer race right outside the presidential retreat at Camp David. And I looked to my left, and there's this pale, skinny guy who looks like he's in his underwear. And I'm thinking, just a few yards from me, oh, my God. You know who that was, Samuel?
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter, President Carter. I'm thinking, I can run with President Carter, but I'm saying, no, I want to win this race. I'm going to run my own race. I didn't win. I did pretty well. But a couple of my buddies were smart. They had cameras, and they ran with Carter, and they made a lot of money recording the fact that Carter collapsed on this run. And it got all over the press, and this was kind of taken as symbolic of the collapsing presidency of Jimmy Carter. Truth is, it should never have been taken that way, because this was the toughest run I've ever been in. 5 kilometers straight down, 5 kilometers straight up on the mountain. Not a big deal that any runner would collapse. But the unknown story that really is much more emblematic of Jimmy Carter than the collapse is what happened afterwards. You know, we have the gathering when they give awards to those who did well in the race, and who should show up with no press, no fanfare, no publicity? Jimmy Carter. And he gave us this extraordinary, inspirational talk just to speak to us, not to promote himself after his so-called collapse. That is really much more emblematic of the man Jimmy Carter than the collapse. You know, 45, 46 years later, that episode is still burned into my consciousness.
Okay. With that, we will sign off for the night. Again, if you're in Los Angeles, make sure you follow all the evacuation orders and the orders from authorities.
We will.
We will. If you're looking to help, I know the Red Cross is taking donations. I know you can also donate to LAFD.
We've done that.
Right. So Yeah, so that's the end of Lichtman Live for tonight. You have any final words for the people, Dad?
Persevere if you're in LA area with the fires. Persevere wherever you are with the devastations of climate change, and persevere with the threats to the great traditions of American democracy. I know we'll somehow come through all of this.
Okay, good night.
Good night.